today, this is what we're going to make. It's a simple box. It's square, has a hinge in the back and a lift in the front, and splines on the corner. Every box starts with a picture for me. You make a simple diagram of the box, you write in your dimensions. In this case, each side is 8 1/4 and it's 3 3/8 inches tall, at least on the side without the top. And then you add those for the perimeter up, and it's 33 inches. You add 1 inch for the cuts that you're going to make for the individual pieces. And you get a board. I need a board 34 inches long, 3 3/8 inches high, and 5/8 of an inch thick. And the cuts I'm going to make are 8 1/4, 8 1/4, 8 1/4, and 8 1/4. When you're making boxes, you want to choose wood with character. The wood that wouldn't suit a cabinet maker or a furniture maker is ideal for a box maker. In this case, we've got a piece of wood with some character. It's white oak, but it's quarter sawn. This planer that we're going to use to make the wood thinner has 100 little teeth like this on it, and they're in a spiral configuration that does a nice job with curly or knotty wood. It won't tear it out like most planers will. We're going to bring it from this thickness down to 5/8 of an inch thick. This will be a little gauge that I can feel with that will let me know how thick the wood is so that I can bring it to the exact thickness that I want. It simply has a magnet on the back and I just stick it on the planer. I put this gauge on the far side. It just sticks to the table with the magnet on the back. And as this board came through the planer, I would feel across the top like this until they match, and then I know I've got the right thickness. It's easy. This is our sample box. What we're doing now is putting this groove that's down here in the bottom of the box, and that's what our box bottom will ride into this groove, this dado, and that's what we're going to cut. This is our board for the outside of the box. We've sized it side to side, we've planed it, we've sanded it, and I took a little time to put a coat of finish on the inside. The reason for that is that it means that when we glue the box up, it won't leave a glue mark, it won't stain. Makes a better finished product. This is magnetic featherboard. You see it has 2 magnets in the bottom of it. And I can shove that against my fence and turn it, and it fastens it in place. That's going to hold this board up against my fence so I don't have to worry about any dimension except the up and down dimension. What I'm going to do now is shove it across this blade. I've set the blade up. This is how far I want how far up I want my dado to start, and this is how deep I want to cut the dado. So I put it right next to the blade and I feel for it, and that's the depth, and then this one sets the width. Okay, we're ready for the cut. So our dado is cut. I went across it the second time just to make sure that there aren't any bumps in this and that it's an even depth all through the cut. It's time to go back to the card we made at the beginning of the project. Our box is 8 1/4 on the side. So we have 8 1/4, 8 1/4, 8 1/4, and 8 1/4 on the square box. That adds up to 33. We have to add 1 inch for the cuts of the 1/8 inch saw blade and squaring up the two ends of the board. So we need a board that's at least 34 inches long to make this box. I took a minute to square up the end of the board, and now we're going to mark off our lengths. This white chalk mark running along the bottom is to designate where the groove is, so that when I reassemble the box, it makes it a little easier to find out where everything is. And now I'm going to measure my first 8 1/4. So 8 1/4 inches. I put 1 mark, 2 marks. I'm going to put the saw right between these 2 marks. Now I take another 8 1/4. Put 2 more marks. Now another 8 1/4 and 2 marks, and 1 more, 8 1/4, 2 marks. The big advantage of 2 marks is I don't have to worry and say to myself, well, do I cut to the left or the right of that mark? Now I know I cut between them and you don't make as many mistakes. Now let's number these. 1 with an arrow, 2 with an arrow, 3 with an arrow, 4 with an arrow. The reason for the arrow is you don't want to get these assembled in reverse order. You want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, so that when you make your box, this grain will flow right around the whole box. All right, now we're going to cut the lengths.
You already made those marks on there. Why are you putting those boards on top of one another?
It's just more accurate to use the pattern. This is a homemade jig designed to cut a 45-degree angle. It's just a 2x4 with a 45-degree angle here and another 45-degree angle down there. Here's a handle, and this is just a regular clamp like you'd use for a straight edge. This will hold the wood on a 45-degree angle. This is a movable stop that I will use. That way all the pieces that I cut are going to be the same size. This clamps it back and forth and locks it into the jig so that the jig will hold it while it goes across the saw blade. This is the inside of the box. Make sure that you have the inside of your box pieces up so that you don't make a mistake and cut it on the wrong side. I push it up against my stop on my jig, lock it in place, and then I can slide it forward and keep my hands safe. Now we're going to cut the bottom for the box. This is the first side. I want my grain to run across the box from side to side, not front to back. So I position this up on the fence so the fence helps me hold it. Now I'm going to slide this board, which is my bottom, into the side. This is what I'm looking for right here, where this board meets the sideboard. The bottom board meets the sideboard of the box. I want just a little bit of space right there. Remember, we're trying to find exactly the right length to fit in the sides of the box. I mark that angle with my pencil. Right to there is the exact right spot. Here's our mark. Here's our cut line. We can cut it just a little bit smaller because it can have a little play in the box, but we don't want it too big. If it's too big, it'll keep the corners from coming together in the finished product. All right, let's cut it. Now you can see it'll fit in the slot and there's a little room left over. We've cut our bottom so that there's a little space left on this side and a little space right here on this side as well. Before you start, you need to have your materials assembled. You need a brush to spread the glue with, then you need the glue itself, and you need the bottom and all four sides. To assemble the box sides, you need a nice straight edge. I'm using the back of my glue up table here. And you notice this is where our numbers come in. 1 with the arrow, 2 with the arrow, 3, 4. And this is the bottom. And you check to make sure your grain matches on all the corners. If you've done a good job on your cuts, you'll have a nice straight edge here that meets. Once this is assembled, that's noisy. We'll pull our tape. This is 1-inch masking tape.
Isn't that 2 inches?
2-inch masking tape. And we'll put that on there and flip it. And now we're ready to do our glue. So I'll put a few drops here and a few drops here and some here and on across till I've got all the sides. It's important that you get glue on this little section right here, because that won't have any reinforcement, and this glue is all that's going to hold it in place. Now we're going to spread our glue so it's even, and it'll make good contact on both sides. Here it goes again. You don't need a lot of glue, you just need glue. A nice coating of the surface. If you put too much on, it's just going to squirt out anyhow. That side's covered, this side's covered. And now to our final side. If you've got any little chips, like I do here, now would be the time to take those off so they don't mess you up later. Alright, when I first started making boxes, I couldn't figure out how to hold all the pieces together. But the tape is a solution. This is the bottom that we just cut. Fold that up. Fold this up. There's our box. We'll put a band clamp on this. And another one on the top. Good tight edges. Remember, we put a finish on the inside of the box, and this is why. When I remove that glue there and then wipe it off, it comes out clean and there won't be any stain on the inside of the box where the glue was. I took a minute to tape up the loose straps so they don't get wound up in the dual drum sander. What we're going to do now is make sure that the top and the bottom are nice and flat so that when we glue the top on, it will fit nice and tightly. I put the box through on an angle like this because it's longer this way than it would be this way. I've got a better chance of getting a nice even sanding plane. We've sanded the top. Now we'll get a good tight joint. And I'm just going to add the glue going around the box. Notice that I just dot it. Spreads a little more easily that way. And I can spread it with my brush, working just outward, not inward, just slanting it a little bit to the outside. Because my glue is still a little bit green, I have left the clamps on it, the band clamps on it. It won't hurt anything in terms of gluing up the box. Okay, I'm getting a nice even coat all the way around the box. Now I'm going to take my finger and come along the inside rim, so that if I'm going to have some glue squeeze out, I want that to be on the outside, not the inside. It's harder to deal with there. This is the top of our box. I took time to sand this nice and smooth because once it's inside the box, it's very difficult to sand it. I marked up on this side so I don't make a mistake on that. Now it's time to set it carefully on the top of the box. And then I'll just let it sit there just for a moment till the glue sort of sticks, and then we'll go to the next step. This is a homemade jig. This jig means that I can eliminate a whole pile of clamps. What I have here is a welded lattice work on the bottom, and my all threads are welded onto that to keep them from turning. Then it comes up through a small piece of PVC, then a spring. This spring holds up on it to hold it open so that I don't have to try to hold it up and slide my box in at the same time. These nuts working on the all threads are what will provide the down force to clamp the whole thing tightly together. It works really well and saves me a lot of time. We've let our glue set up just a little bit, and now we're going to carefully slide it in the box, trying not to bump the top. To make it work a little better, since it's a small box and a big clamp, we're going to add some cawls on top. And those will sort of help fill up the space between the box and the clamp. This is an impact driver with a deep well socket on it. I'll use that to tighten my clamp. It's much faster than using a wrench. Before I go too far, I want to check and make sure that I've got A little bit of squeeze out and that my top overlaps the edges on all four sides. Last time we did an exercise where we made the slots and put the splines in them. We're going to pick it up there today. Here's what the next step looks like when we have glued the splines in. You can see they're glued in the slots. The box is not cut, it's all one solid piece. Here's what we have. We have the splines sticking out over the edge of the box, and we want to make them flush. So the first step is just to take off this excess so that it's a little closer to the box. Here's a hint. It's easier when you're cutting these to come from the inside to the outside and sort of catch underneath the edge. We're going to do this on the bandsaw. This step is the right step to make sure that you've gotten rid of all your glue and squeeze out. Right now we've got them cut off roughly, the splines, and now we're going to use this belt sander to sand them down flush. What we're doing on this step is rounding the edges off like you see in the finished box. The reason you want to do this now is the box is all in one piece. You don't have a hinge in the way. You're not fighting with a box that has been cut. So this is the stage to round this, rough it in, and make sure all your smoothness is like you want it on the corners. We've got a large diameter router bit set up in a table with a vacuum, and we'll just run our box right along the edge of it. Here we go. Sanding is boring, and with this I have 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to kind of rough it out. I'm going to take off the burn marks and any excess glue. Remember, we started with one long board, and we cut our lengths and then 45 them. The purpose of all that is so that the grain matches, so that when you make a box, the grain matches perfectly and it wraps right around the edge. I'm going to mark the back of the box here because I want this corner, the one where the grain does not match and go around, I want to put it on the back of the box. So this is where I'll put my hinge, and that will put that corner at the back. This is a piece of the side of the box, and I'm going to put it right there so that just a little bit of my blade sticks through. That way I can cut through the side, but just barely cut through the sides of the box. Always put the top of the box away from the fence. And we've set the blade halfway between the top two splines. Now we're ready to cut.
So you lowered the blade after the first two cuts. Why'd you do that?
We left just that small sliver of wood. That keeps the box from collapsing and pinching the saw blade, which would give us big trouble. Now, I'll just take a knife and score along there until I cut through that little sliver of wood. Do the same on the other side. There's our box. On this step, we're going to take off this sharp edge so that when you reach into the box, it's not sharp on your fingers. We're doing that with a 1/2 inch round over bit, and we'll take it off on 3 sides. We won't take it off on the hinge side because that would interfere with the mortise. We'll do the same process with the top. Round off 3 of the edges. I've tried lots of ways, but the best way to make the top and bottom of a box fit is a dual drum sander. It has to open up far enough to let you slide the whole box through, but it does a great job. After the cut on the saw, there's just a little bit of difference right here and this sliver left over from the small remnant that we used to space it apart. We're going to run it through this dual drum sander, and that will take that off and make this perfectly level so we get a great fit on the top and bottom of the box. Same process with the top. There you have it, a perfect fit. This tool is called a spindle sander. This spins and goes up and down. What this sandpaper onto this spindle will sand away a surface on a box or a piece of wood. I've modified it with a larger table, and I have an adjustable fence here so that I can change the distance between the spindle sander and my fence. The first step is to figure out what the front of the box is. You can see here I've marked the back, and I want to carve my lift in the front of the box. I'm going to use my tri-square by putting it on that side of the box and making a mark. I've just kind of guessed at what might be the center of the box. And then I put one here. It's hard to know the center when you're judging a large distance, but it's easy to know the difference between two short lines in a small space. So now I will readjust my square so that it comes right to the middle of those two lines. Lock it down, and there we are, center of the box. Here are our two lines from our guesses. We've now adjusted our tri-square so that it hits right in the middle. And there is the middle of our box. The table is adjustable up and down. The more angle I put on it, the longer it makes the indent. This jig has a narrow side and a wider side. I can make the 3 cuts by cutting the first one on the narrow side, the second one against the bare fence, and the third one on the wide side. They're each set 3/8 of an inch apart that way. So you get a cut like that. This is the distance that we got from our box to find our center. Now we're going to lay off the same distance on our top here. Here's a line, and it lines up directly with the center of our spindle. I'll put this tri-square on the line, and then I'm going to move the fence till it comes right over against my tri-square. So I've set off the distance between here and my fence being equal to the center of the box. We're going to set our box against the fence, bring it right up against the spindle. And we get a finger lift. There's the first cut. Take that guide off, put it against the fence. There's the second cut. Turn the guide around. There's the third cut. To make a hinge for this box, we start with a 4-foot hinge, and we're going to cut it down from there. This is a piano hinge that I cut down from the longer one that we looked at a minute ago. And the parts of a hinge are fairly simple. These are the knuckles, and inside the knuckle in this hole is a pin that runs the length of the hinge, and the hinge revolves around that pin. This is a hinge that I've already cut down from a longer hinge. What we're going to do is size it to the box. You don't want a hole to be out here too near the edge. So, and it's better to cut through what's known as the knuckle of the hinge. So let's make one cut here, and we'll slide that over so it's inside the box, and then we'll come over here, and it looks like I can make the other cut right here. What we're doing here is insetting the hinge and mortising it in to the back of our box so that the top of the box is equal to the top of the hinge. To do that, we have to cut away a thin strip of wood. This is the hinge that we marked, and I'm going to cut it with a metal cutting bandsaw. I'm fortunate to have this tool. It speeds up the operation, but you could do it with a hacksaw. We've made our cut right here, and it's pretty rough. We're going to smooth that up. Then we're going to reduce our pin and round off all our edges so that you can't get cut on them. This is a machine that's especially made for sanding metal. It's a 1-inch belt sander, and I'm going to smooth up that rough edge with it. These edges are too sharp for our box. Somebody would get hurt if you left those that way. So we're going to round off this back edge, round off this front edge, and make sure there are no burrs along these edges here. What we're going to do is use this punch to shove the pin out of the knuckles. Here's a magnet that it fastens onto, and that frees up my hands so that I can use 2 hands to knock that pin out. We've knocked the pin out, and there's a hole down here that allows it to come out. Right here's a hole. And the pin, you can see, is sticking out of the hinge. Now I'm going to cut that off.
How much do you cut off?
Oh, about a knuckle's worth. The knuckles are approximately a 1/4 inch, between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. So I cut off that much, and then I'm going to tuck it back in. If you don't do this, over time, your pin will stick out, and you run the risk of it hurting somebody by having a sharp pointy thing sticking out the end of your hinge. Now we're going to tap just a little bit on the ends, and that's going to crimp this so that the pin can't come out of the hinge. We removed the finish from the edges, so we're going to replace that with spray paint. That's all it takes. I'm using my tri-square again. I'm trying to get an equal distance on this side of the hinge and that side of the hinge. And you can move your blade of your tri-square in and out until you get that right even. Just touching and just touching. This is a very simple router table. It has a router beneath it with the blade for the router sticking up through it. There's also a vacuum set up here that will suck the chips away. This router blade, a straight cutting blade, is set as high as the thickness of our hinge so that we can mortise it into the back. This is the distance that we set off for our equal sides of our box to center our hinge. Now what we need to do is take this same distance and set the back of the tri-square here even with the very end of the cutter blade. The next step is to cut the mortise slot. My blade is set, my fence is set. Now I have to double check to make sure I'm working on the back of the box, and this is where I want to cut my slot. Now we're going to do the top of the box. Remember, we've got it set off this far so it'll be nice and centered, and that will cut away the parts of the box that we don't need. This is the finished slot cut, the finished miter, and our hinge is going to fit right into that slot. This is the time to remove these little burrs left over from the routing process. Just takes a light sanding. That's hard to do when you are trying to work underneath the hinge. So I took off back here on this edge, right here on the two cuts, and now everything's nice and smooth. Well, we coated the ends of our hinge so they can't rust now. Now we fit them right in place. And if you've done a good job on your mortise, it's nice and tight side to side. This is a VIX bit. It's the only way to put a hinge in and get it in the right place. There's a taper right here on the end. It's spring loaded. And there's a bit that comes right out of the center that will start our screws. I'll show you how it works. Now we're going to use our VIX bit to put a pilot hole in for our screw. Once you've checked the fit side to side and front to back, you can put the second screw in, and that's going to lock everything in place. If you have an error, you can still have these other two holes and try to fix it. It's easy. You just move it around where you want it, drill fresh holes, and then use a toothpick to put in the old hole and straighten it up. To put the hinge in the top, it helps if you've got something to lean the bottom against so you can keep an angle on it. You check to make sure that it's nice and even along the inside, just like it was there. Put in your screw hole. And add the screw. Now we check to see how we're doing side to side and front to back. I was just a little bit off when I installed my hinge. There's a little bump right here between the top and bottom. I'm lucky enough to have a large belt sander, and that removes a multitude of sins. Well, that's the end of building a box. We've got splines, we've got an attached top, we've got a hinge set in a nice tight mortise. We put in the bottom. All neat and tidy. And that winds it up. Of course, all that's left now is more sanding and the finish, but that's for another day. So, this is Box Guy signing off along with
Camera Guy Ken.
Thanks. See you next time. When you're cutting a slot, let's start that again.
Go ahead.
When you're cutting slots, whoops. Most boxes, because they're small and not large, look better if you, what's that mean?
Because they're small and not large. What the heck is that?
I put this on the far side. It's magnetic, so it just sticks down on the table. And then, as the board goes through, I feel back and forth to make sure that I haven't thicknessed it too thinly. Let me start that again.
Thickness it too thinly.
Let's try that again. Ready? I put this, always put the top away from the fence. Let's do that again.
Good.
I'm going to, am I ready? Wait a minute, I think what this tool is.
It fits what?
I mean, it's right, but it didn't sound right.
Okay. All right, go.
What we're going to do is use this punch to shove, maybe not.
Oops.
And we can just start our screw. Well, fiddle.
It's okay.
Then use a toothpick to put in the old hole and straighten it up.